Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you back to part 3 of our historical criticism of Islam. In the last 2 episodes, we gave a brief overview about the traditional dates Muslims tend to use concerning the rise of Islam and the history of Islam. And then part 2, we talked about the discoveries out there by the scholars, the Orientalists, if you wish, who deal with those kind of basically issues, and what did they say or what did they show in some cases. Today we're going to continue with some issues related to the historical problem with Islam, and we're going to focus on the geography of the Quran. With me here is Dr. Jay Smith, who's been gracious enough to spend a lot of time with us here to do all of these multi-part series on these fabulous discoveries and new topics that every Muslim needs to watch.
Okay.
Welcome back.
It's so good to be back again. So good to have you and have me come on the show. And what we're going to be introducing and what we want to look through are the historical difficulties concerning the narrative, the Islamic narrative. The narrative that we said in the first episode, which is that Muhammad was born in 570, then lived in Mecca to begin with, moved to Medina in 622, received the Meccan revelation between 610 and 622, then the Medina revelation 622 to 632, the last 10 years of his life when he died in 632. That's the narrative that you hear everywhere that no one's ever questioned.
Correct.
No one's ever questioned whether or not Muhammad, whether he existed. I don't think that's in question. We know he did exist. But whether he lived in Mecca, whether he moved to Medina, whether he lived in that part of the world, no one's ever questioned that, how Islam began. Whether there was a Quran that was revealed to him, no one's ever questioned that. It was just assumed that the Quran comes from him. He didn't write it, but that it was revealed to him. That has always been the narrative that you hear in every university, every school,
correct,
with everyone, Muslim and non-alike. Until certain scholars, and these are all Western scholars, notice the names that we gave up there in the last episode, not one of them is Muslim.
Correct.
Muslims are not asking this question.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, and they should be the first to ask this question. The fact that Westerners who are, we call them Islamicists, not Islamists. An Islamist is a Muslim scholar. An Islamicist is a Western scholar of Islam. Just so we define terms. These are Islamicists who, as you mentioned, are also known as Orientalists. That is a name that is imposed on them by the Muslims who don't like them.
I see.
And you're going to hear this on the internet. Orientalism is now considered to be a bad word. It's a word that has been, it's pejorative by the Muslims. Anybody who's an Orientalist hates Islam. They're Islamophobes. And yet the questions these Islamicists are raising are the same questions that were raised against the Bible, the same questions that were raised against Jesus and his historicity.
That's
perfectly valid questions.
And many times they are very respectful of Islam and they present the evidence in a very respectful environment.
You're forced to do that because if you don't, you're going to have all these areas of your research are shut down. You won't be invited to those countries. You're not permitted. Islam uniquely is really the only religion that does not allow criticism of its book or of its man or of its God. And that's why almost every Orientalist I know would rather keep their research in academia. People like Patricia Corona. She keeps material way up, and she keeps it in the original language. She told me face-to-face in her office when I was getting ready for this debate that she didn't want Muslims really to read this. This was for other academics, other Orientalists, and they have their symposiums and they have their meetings almost in isolation because they're not interested that Muslims hear this. This is nothing more than an academic exercise for them. Now, for me, I'm sitting there and saying, wait a minute. The very people who need to read this are the Muslims themselves.
Absolutely.
As Christians, we had to read the criticism that was thrown against us. We did not walk away from it. We did not shirk our responsibility. We found and we realized that it jacked us up and said, Christians, get on the ball. If you cannot prove that Abraham existed, if you cannot prove there was a man named Moses, if you cannot prove there was an Old Testament, if you cannot prove who Jehu was or Hezekiah was, then don't even say that these are historical characters. And that's why we then went, and we have now found the Amarna tablets, the Mari tablets, the Ebla tablets, all these genre of tablets that now support the historicity, the period of who Abraham was, what he did, even the customs of Abraham. We got the right man at the right place doing the right thing at the right time. Same thing with Jehu. We now have an image of Jehu. We now have a Taylor prism. You can go to the British Museum and see Hezekiah named by name. We got the right man at the right place in the right time. That's how specific I have, so that we can pretty much say, and I will say this, and I will be the first to be recorded, there's not one artifact, not one tablet, not one mural, not one artifact anywhere in the world, not one stela or obelisk anywhere in the world that contradicts a properly understood biblical statement.
That's correct.
Let me repeat that. Not one artifact that we have been able to find anywhere in the world that contradicts a properly understood biblical statement. We could not say that 100 years ago. We can now say it today because we did our homework. And that's why we've done this museum tour of the British Museum. We've had 6,000 people come on that tour just because all the artifacts that the British, God bless them, they went around all over the world, stole everything, and brought it to one building called the British Museum. Had they not done that, this material would not be there for us to look at. And that's why it's important as historians, and I'm telling you, as neutral historians, that we now ask the exact same questions posed against the Bible, good questions, and now ask them of Islam and any religion.
And that's an excellent, basically, segue into the topic of geography.
Geography, let's then ask this question. And let's put up the slide, because I want people to see the slide that we're talking about. This was the slide. This is now coming from Dan Gibson's material. And Dan Gibson noticed, after working for 25 years in the Arab world, he noticed that when he opened the Quran, and he noticed that there were about 50 to 55 geographical locations. 65 geographical locations. 55 to 65 geographical locations within the Quran. He noticed that only 9 places are named specifically. But this prophet, which is fascinating, because in the Quran, this prophet is only named 4 times.
That's correct.
All the other times, it's just the Nabi or the Rasulullah. It's just the prophet of God. It doesn't really give him a name, which is odd. You would think it would give him a name.
You would expect that if he's in the line of biblical prophets where their names were mentioned hundreds of times.
Absolutely. We have 93 references to Isa in the Quran. Many more of Abraham and Moses than there are Muhammad.
Correct.
Even Mary is mentioned more than Muhammad.
That's right.
So certainly you ask, this is odd that this man is not named, place where he comes from. It talks about the settlement of the prophet, but only once does it mention Mecca in the entire Quran.
And the second time it used Mecca, which is not even the way you say it.
That's not. That's even the wrong consonantal text. You can see that as an Arabist. You know what you're talking about there. But what he noticed is that over and over again, 23 times, it kept on referring to Ad. These people from Ad who had contact with this prophet. 23 times. 24 times it referred to these people from Thamud. Now, Ad would be the biblical Uz that we have in the Bible. Thamud would be the Nabateans. So these are well-known people in our Bible. They're well-known historically. These are not mysterious or mythological people. Correct. These are actually historically documented people. 24 times he has his contact with Thamud. 7 times he has contact with people from Midian. That's also the Midianites from the Bible. We know these people. These are well known. But take a look at that map there that we have on that slide and look where Ad, Thamud, and Midian are. They're way up north.
And that's strange because if Muhammad was living in Mecca or Medina, you would find him to be concerned about things around his surrounding.
Look at Mecca. It's right at the bottom of the map.
Absolutely.
That's 600 miles between Ad and Mecca. 600 miles distant, unless he had a helicopter and he was going up there back and forth every day, 1,200 miles there and back, there's no way he could have this kind of contact as it says in the Quran. And Dan saw that. He said, this is curious. This doesn't make sense. This character could not be living way up there. He's way down here in Mecca. We've always been told that, in Mecca. It's 600 miles out of that reference point. So when you look at, let's look at the slide here. If you look at the comparison, 65 geographical references in the Quran, 9 places named, but they're all in the wrong place. They're 600 miles too far north. When you look at the Gospel of Luke, which is the most historical, probably the most historical gospel we have as far as names, dates, places, and events. That's why we like Luke, because he was a physician. He always placed it and solidified it in history. That's why the book of Acts is so good too. Both Luke and the book of Acts are our most historical books. Just take a look at the Gospel of Luke. 110 geographical references in the Gospel of Luke. 31 places named. Every one of them is in the right place.
That's correct.
Now, there has been much discussion on it, and that's why in the last 50 to 100 years, there's been lots of discussions about the writer of Luke. Did he get the right person at the right place? In every case, he was correct. When you do a comparison, even the Gospel of Luke is far superior to the Quran when it comes about the historical accuracy of the places that they're talking about.
He even said he went and inspected and investigated everything himself.
So you've got a problem geographically. Now let's go to problem number 2. And let's put the slide back up again. Number 2 is Mecca. And here's where the rubber really hits the road. Mecca is a real problem. I introduced this problem way back in 1995 from reading about Patricia Crone wrote an entire book called Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam in 1987. Read that book. And she has 15 chapters on that book, just looking at problem after problem after problem with Mecca. See, there's only one reference. Chapter 48, verse 24 is the only reference to Mecca. But it doesn't tell you anything about it. And it is who hath withheld men's hand from you, and hath withheld your hands from them in the valley of Mecca. So you know it's in a valley. Okay, that's about it. That's all you're going to be told. Mecca, as you said, in chapter 3, verse 94, is not Mecca. As you know, as an Arab, those are different consonants, aren't they?
And it talks about a shrine that is there, which is very interesting because I'm sure later you're going to allude to another location that would have had something like this.
Okay, we're going to get to that, all right? Now, let's move on to what we're going to do with Mecca. Now, let's put the slide up and let's look why Mecca is so important. According to the Islamic traditions and the Quran, let's just start with the Quran. It's the first sanctuary appointed for mankind was at Mecca or Mecca. They're trying to say that's Mecca or Mecca. That's interesting that they're using both interchangeably there. Mecca is the mother of all settlements, according to Surah 6. It is where Adam and Eve were thrown down to, according to 7:24. It doesn't say Mecca in Surah 7:24. In fact, none of these does it say Mecca at all.
Correct.
Only once does it say Mecca, but it was thrown down to a location. What Muslims today say that was Mecca. How did they know that?
Yeah, that's correct.
If that were the case then, if that is correct, let's just take that at face value. That means it's the earliest settlement in the history of mankind.
That's correct.
The very first settlement.
Exactly.
It should be therefore well known, correct?
There has to be artifacts and everything to prove that.
In Surah 21, ayahs 51 to 71, they imply, it doesn't say Mecca, it just says that Abraham went there into the Kaaba and he destroyed all the idols in the Kaaba. So where is this Kaaba? Well, all Muslims will say that's Mecca. Well, that means Mecca should have existed in 1900 BC when Abraham was living, right?
That's correct.
So historically, I want to find some reference point that there is a place called Mecca in 1900 BC.
And this place is rich with archaeological matters, basically.
Now, Muslims will tell us that is where Muhammad was born. That's where he grew up, lived there till 622. That it became the central. It was a center of all the Qibla. Qibla is the direction of prayer at 624, and we see that in Surah 2, ayah 145 to 149. So every mosque should be facing Mecca.
Correct.
Mecca is the place. Now, it doesn't say in the Quran Mecca. It's just the holy place.
That's right.
There's no reference to a city
Exactly.
called. Isn't that fascinating? If that is so important, why did they name it? Now, only one reference, as I said earlier, is Surah 48, ayah 24. Now, what we're going to do is we're now going to go and we're going to unpack this. We're going to show you why this is hugely important. When you go back, let's put the next slide up. When you look at Mecca today, according to what the traditions tell us, these are later, what they tell us about this place where this prophet lived is that it's in a valley, that's also in the Quran, and that there's a parallel valley, that it has a stream going through that. We see that in Al-Bukhari, that it has outside is a pillar of salt that this prophet would pass in the morning and then come back in the evening. So it means it has to be right outside of where this prophet lived, whoever this prophet is. That it had fields, according to Al-Bukhari, that it had trees, grass, fruit, loam, according to Tirmidhi, Al-Bukhari, and Al-Tabari talk about that it had olive trees, and that the mountains were overlooking the Kaaba. So there must be mountains right there overlooking the Kaaba. Take a look at that. Mecca, if you look at Mecca, it's not in a valley, there's no parallel valley, there's no stream, there is not even any water there. There's only one well called the Zamzam well. It's the most arid place, one of the most arid places on earth. It never had fields or trees, grass, fruit, loam, and it never had olive trees because olive trees don't even exist that far south. They are only around the Mediterranean.
That's right.
Everybody knows olive trees only grow around the Mediterranean, 600 miles further north. And there's no mountains overlooking the Kaaba. They're about 2 kilometers, 2 to 3 kilometers away. So Mecca is not in a valley, has none of these listed above, and that's why Dan Gibson was curious. And all of us should be curious.
Absolutely.
If that is not the case, then you've got a problem. Now I want to look at a series of maps. Look at this map here. This is a Byzantine map from the 7th century. What's missing on that map?
Mecca is missing for sure.
Okay, let's
and
take
in fact, Medina is mentioned, Yathrib.
There you go. Now I want you to look at this map here. Now it says Medina. This is the trade route. Can you notice what's missing on the trade route?
Mecca.
Mecca's not on the trade route. Now here are some authoritative maps. This is a 6th century map. Can you find Mecca on that map?
Absolutely
You
not.
cannot. Take a look at this map. Here's a 7th century map. Can you find Mecca on that map?
Okay, it's
You
not
can
there.
find Khaybar, Tabuk. You can see Yathrib, which is the archaic name for Medina. You can find Gaza in the north. You can find Aden in the south. You cannot find Mecca anywhere on that map. Here's another 7th century map. Again, similar to the one we just looked at. A completely different map. These are from those centuries. Mecca is not on that map as well. Now, stop and think, Al. Mecca should have been around from the very beginning. It should have been certainly from the 19th century. Why can't we find Mecca on that map?
That's peculiar. I mean,
It is peculiar.
You would expect at least a reference to it somewhere.
Another 7th century map. Mecca still does not exist.
That indicates at least it's not a prominent city at all or town.
And then I'm going to end this map here, because this is the map that Dr. Patricia Kroner looked at. This is a map attributed back to the 7th century, written or put together in the 20th century to attribute what we now know, what we think would exist. There is Mecca on this map, but this is a 20th century map, is it not? Oh, it is. You don't have to tell me yes or no. Now, take a look at it, and she noticed something very curious. If you look at the green line on the left side of Arabia, that's the trade route. And if you look at it carefully, it starts at Aden in the south, goes to Najran, Sana, goes up to Taif.
Correct.
Then it zipped down. Look at Taif and look and follow where the green line does. It comes down off we're up on a plateau, comes down 1,000 meters down to Mecca. And then it goes back up again to get back up to Yathrib. You can see there's a detour from Taif down to Mecca and then back up to Yathrib. Okay? If you look at it carefully, those of you who are watching this, take a look at it carefully, and then you notice from then Yathrib, and then it goes up to Tabuk, Khaybar, and then up to Gaza in the north. That is the western plateau. She looked at it and says, hold on a minute. Mecca's not on the plateau. It's off the plateau. Why had anybody noticed this before? More than that, she noticed that all the trade that would have come from India and China, which is over in the east, could not go north because you have the mountains there. You can see the mountains. That's the Himalaya mountains and the Hindu Kush. In order to get over to the Mediterranean world, they would have to go across the Arabian Sea, off the coast of India, across the Arabian Sea up to the Persian Gulf, and from there, then they would go over to the Mediterranean. That's where all the trade went until the 5th century. AD. In the 5th century, you have the Persians, which is there. You can see where the Sassanids are, the Persian Empire. We're warring against the Byzantines.
Correct.
Over up in the northwest there, where Turkey is, and coming down to where Jerusalem, along the eastern Mediterranean. That's the Byzantine Empire. And you had these two great empires were crashing, warring against each other for 200 years, which shut down the Middle East. And as a result, they had to redirect the trade across the Arabian Sea over to Aden in the south. And they took off all the goods there in Aden and went 1,250 miles overland. And that's why Mecca became important. Mecca became the center of trade, according to the trade route theory put together by Montgomery Watt. He was one that came up with this theory back in the 1900s. Everybody jumped on it and said, this is brilliant. That explains why Mecca was important. Patricia Krohn looked at it and says, hold on a minute. Now I'm going to see if you can see what's wrong with that theory. My 10-year-old son saw what was wrong with that theory. Let's see if you can see wrong just by looking at that map. What is wrong with that theory?
If you go to Taif alone, you're going to notice that what camel can go down a hill like this? Second of all, why would you take mountainous route when you can just go through the Red Sea?
Ooh, you got it. It's a no-brainer. Look at the map. And this is what Patricia Krohn says. Look at the map again. Why would you take all the goods, and let's look at the map again, why would you take all the goods off at Aden and go 1,250 miles by land when you've got a waterway called the Red Sea going up the west coast?
Absolutely. And you can just stop everywhere.
Even today, it's the cheapest way to take goods from China to bring them over here is by ship.
Absolutely.
She found out that you can go 50 miles by land for the same price as going 1,250 miles by sea. The same ton of goods, 50 miles by land costs the same price as 1,250 miles by sea. And the reason is very simple. If you're going by land and you have camels, you've got to protect the camels, you've got to feed them, you've got to house them, you've got to water them. And more than that, you have robbers along the way, all the security problems, to say nothing of that. But you have to raise them and buy them. Whereas if you have a boat, all you need is wind.
Absolutely.
So she said it doesn't make sense that they were going by land. So now remember, she reads and writes 15 languages. She went back to all the original documents. She went to the trading documents, and here's what she found, that all the trade was maritime. She went up and down the west coast of India and found that all the trading documents had no Arab names. The names that came up over and over again were Ethiopian and Eritrean. Agilis, and you can see where Agilis is on the map. That's on the eastern coast of Africa there. They were the traders. Also. They loved ships. Arabs, look and see if you can find coastal cities. They were not seafarers. They were camel herders. They were desert nomads. That's why their names are not found in any of these documents. That's historical evidence right there. She said, we have got the wrong narrative here. There was no trade that was international that went through Mecca. Mecca did not control any trade. And she found out that the only trade that went through Mecca was leather and milk that came from the Hadramaut, the southern ports. All the frank and incense, all these different
spices and everything.
All these spices went up through the Red Sea. They went by boat.
Perfume and everything else.
All of it went by boat.
That's right.
Ooh, I love that. Now, that is the first thing we're going to look at. Now, we're going to stop there because we're going to find out. So let me just finish with this one last slide. That is this here. So she wanted to find any reference to Mecca anywhere. She went through all the trading documents. She went through the historical documentation from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th century, no reference to Mecca anywhere on anything. There you can see the first document that finally mentioned Mecca. It's called the Apocalypse of Pseudo-Methodius Continuata Byzantia Arabica. That's a mouthful. 741 is the first reference to Mecca. I mentioned that back in 1995 in my debate with Dr. Jamal Badawi. That still stands. We're now in 2018. Nobody has been able to find an earlier reference than that. So for 23 years now, they've not been able to dispute that. And we're still putting out to Muslims, find us a date of any reference to Mecca earlier than 741. If you can't find a reference to Mecca, then don't claim that this city existed. It did not exist, certainly in the 7th century AD. It did not exist at the time of Abraham in 1900 BC, and it certainly, therefore, could not have existed at the time of Adam and Eve. So, therefore, what are we going to do with Mecca? We're going to come back to that, and we're going to start ask some really damaging questions.
Thank you. And hopefully everybody has enjoyed this particular part that we have covered so far. And when we come back, we'll continue our discussions about the historical criticism and the geographical criticism, in this case, in terms of Mecca, as it relates to traditions versus factual discoveries. Till we meet again, have a blessed day. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss future videos. And please consider becoming a patron on patreon.com/CIRA International.